All right, welcome everybody for this Canadian Patriot Podcast. And I'm very, very happy to be joined once again by Johnny Vedmore. And I got a really great spectrum of feedback after our previous discussion, which is available in the description box. People can go check that out. Johnny has done some fantastic work on the intellectual dark web, which was generally the topic of the previous conversation. What is this thing that sort of has emerged, absorbing many critical thinking components of our society, which is just something that it has a breath of fresh air on the one hand, because it acknowledges a much broader spectrum of reality, of logic, of reason that is otherwise rejected by the current governing mythos and narratives of the woke Frankfurt School, agenda. So on the one hand, you have that that seemingly healthy reasoning process made transparent, which is very attractive to many people who don't want to just assimilate themselves to some weird liberal Borg. But then on the other hand, there's some weird red alarms and strange players and actors who seem to be shaping that intellectual dark web space that so many people, including Johnny and myself, and I think almost anybody watching this, have found very attractive at different times. So there's a different game within a game being played, a certain gang counter gang operation. So that whole discussion is in the description box with Johnny's previous articles on that topic. Today, however, I found myself doing a little bit of work because I'm trying to end a book that I'm writing on the revenge of the mystery cults. And so one of the volume 2 of my 3 books is going to be tackling the occult Tesla, Rosicrucian Golem. And I'm both referring to the original Nikola Tesla, but I'm also referring to Tesla 2.0, the rebranded Tesla, as a new 2 aspects of the same governing myth run by the exact same sort of invisible college operation, which Johnny actually identified. I was very happy to see that he is one of the few who identified the role of the Rosicrucian Invisible College behind the social engineering operations that have been running roughshod on our society. And so I was trying to piece together the role of people like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, who's playing a sort of role as a cardboard cutout in this thing to create new sacred myths about what is technology, what is human genius, what is government, where does it come from, what should it do. And your 2-part series on the third way and the third culture, I found were brilliant. It really helped me a lot at piecing together a lot of details that I needed to make that story kind of work to finish out my book. So thank you for that. And I was so impressed that I asked Johnny for a little chat, which he was benevolent enough to say yes to. So we're going to talk about Johnny's papers and his research. So thank you, Johnny.
Oh, thank you for having me. I always love to have a chat. I love it. I love a good conversation, and this is like something I worked on for quite a while, especially the third way. The third way, the third culture article was a multitude of different investigations that's been going on over years, all kind of like intersecting and coming together in a way that I wasn't expecting. It was almost like it seemed like my previous research had been must have been contrived to some way to what the end result was, because it's just so fantastic how I had been studying behavioral insight teams, Richard Thaler, alongside Epstein, Musk, and other things. But the third way article was a real special. Took about a year and a half of research with a guy called Darren Kent, and I got to give him a low. I mean, we didn't know what this article would be, and we didn't know where we'd end up until we started looking at the idea of what was happening within these like Fabian organizations, politically linked Fabian actors in the United Kingdom, who were kind of like forming this ideology. But I had never heard of third way. I had never heard of third culture. I'd never heard of these things. And when it's explained to people, because I mean, this is 2 articles, but you talk about games there, you talk about the intellectual dark web, we know about game B. That's another type of the same sort of thing. It's like the synthesis of you've had like a left right 2 pole sort of dialectical form, and these ideas are a way to kind of like go above them and form into synthesis. And so it's kind of like that working up, as what Courtney Turner would say, the Jacob's ladder. And I think that there's a real interesting thing that people can't identify what these things are when they first see them. Third way, very, very much so. I was talking, when I was writing this article, I was working on TNT and I was doing the show 5 days a week. And
Hmm.
I was purposely getting people on who were politicians and asking them about the third way in ways that, like, slipping it into conversation, talk, asking a question, and most people hadn't a clue what it was. They don't even hear it, they don't even see it. I don't think most politicians know what this is, you know. I
Yeah.
don't think or people in general don't know what third way is. Out on the street, no one knows, you
So
know.
how about
No.
this? How about let's go straight into it then. Like how would you define, just for the listener, right? Naively listening, what is third way as you've discovered it? Because honestly, I didn't have that terminology either until I read your paper and I saw all of a sudden your links. And I like clicking on links, hyperlinks inside of text. I'm one of those people. And sure
Mhm.
enough, you're backing up. You have hyperlinks everywhere. I'm clicking on Bill Clinton and yep, he's announcing 1992 his policy philosophy is going to be third way. The Tony Blairites, the New Labour in Britain, also clearly self-identifying as third way. So what is third way?
It's an infectious, viral form of politics that you can't see coming. It's the synthesis of the center ground. It's the illusory synthesis of the center ground. They take the center left, they take the center right, and they purge the left and rights of those part of the political spectrum, and they move everything to the center, and then they keep purging until it seems like it's center, but it seems like it's above it. Third way is meant to be above it. And Norberto Bobbio, who wrote a book about a lot of this sort of political sociological thinking, he wrote about third way and said that, you know, it's like an illusory different, you think it's above the center, but it's not. Once you realize it's just the center, and it has no solutions. It has no solutions. All the solutions on the left and right, however much we don't want that to be so, the
Yeah.
solutions on the left and right. So they purge these parties, and we see it in Britain. You know, Britain ran under third way as well. Third way was written up by a guy called Anthony Giddens. He had written multi parts of political thinking. It got to about 1990, and he had written third way into existence. And the Democrat Party, they will find it hard to regain power. The Labour Party, they will find it hard to regain power. They were trying to think, how do we renew ourselves? And to renew themselves was to purge their left and move to the centre and enact third way politics. And in doing that, you basically get to remove all of the people who are most troublesome, and you force the other side. So as the centre left moved in, as Bill Clinton adopted Anthony Giddens' third way politics and moved into the centre, not only did he purge the left, but he forced the right to move into the centre, to more into the centre too. And then the right to compete have to basically do the same thing, and you end up with parties that are all in the centre ground. So much so that now what I would say is a part of the result of this is how you see the Republican Party stocked with Democrats. They've all had to move so much towards the center that can just mix and match their
Yeah.
politicians because they're all in the same illusory political ideal that cannot work. As soon as you realize it's centrist, you realize it has no value, it has no power.
Yeah.
And so it's a really complicated like thing for people to understand, and so people don't see it. So that's why I say it's like an infection. You see what you see, suddenly you look around and your world's changing. It's these purgings happening, and you're wondering, like, we've had multiple purges. When Bill Clinton was running for office in 1992, nearly like loads of the Labour Party young guns in the UK were going over to America and they were learning from this new third way style. Yvette Cooper was working on his policy stuff. She's now our Home Secretary, but she's always been really powerful in the Labour Party, especially when it comes to purging the left with Corbyn. And that was one of the main things that they wanted to do. Her husband, of course, is Ed Balls, who was shadow deputy, shadow chancellor under when Ed Miliband was shadow leader when they were outside government with their failed elections. All of these guys were in
Yeah. Well,
America learning third way
that's
politics.
right. Yeah, no, and Cooper was working for the Bill Clinton campaign, and you had, as you pointed out in your article, Ed Balls was being tutored by Larry Summers and
And
Robert
Robert
Reich.
Reich,
And
yeah.
Robert Reich, just like Bill Clinton, is an Oxford Rhodes Scholar. So of course you have this weird convergence once again back to this whole weird Fabian Rhodes Scholar parasite that seems to have been like perverting most of the 20th century. Um, and also you brought up Miliband as well, right? Who's also another
David
one of these.
Miliband's in MIT, I believe he is.
Yeah.
And Ed Miliband is right in their father is already based in America by this point, so it's easy for them to be over there. But they were all heading back towards government, and good Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, who were also International Visitors Leadership Program alumni. They went through it twice, which is an American program that's kind of like, the International Seminar or the World Economic Forum's Young Global Leader. It welcomes potential global leaders in to learn a more intelligence-based American sort of identity to their politics so
Yeah.
that they can gain more traction when it comes to foreign affairs, etc. They had already gone through that program, Brown in 84, Blair in 86. They'd go through the World Economic Forum Young Global Leadership Program first year when it was a Global Leaders for Tomorrow in 1993 as well. But then they would go back home to John Smith, who was a Labour leader, and say, hey, you should enact this politics, this third way stuff. And he was like, no, there's no way. He used strong words. He used the F word. He used strong words to say there's no way that stuff is being used in this party because we are a left-wing party.
Yeah.
But that's not what was going to happen. John Smith was going to die of a heart attack suddenly a couple of years later. And then in
Mm.
come Blair and Brown, and they make a backroom deal to who's going to be chancellor and who's going to be prime minister. Blair comes out as prime minister.
And just so important here for people who may be a little bit confused. But you had the old Labor and you had the old Democratic Party, and for people who forgot what that is, because maybe they're just too young to have had a living memory of it, and I understand that. I'm too young to have a living memory of it, but so you have to do a bit of research. But the JFK, the party of the Democrats of John F. Kennedy, of Bobby Kennedy, was a very different machinery that actually did profile its or shape its identity around the idea of reining in corporations, banking power, looking out for labor, generally being very resistant to imperialism. Same thing for labor. There was generally a tradition for same thing within the Labor Party prior to the Blair Revolution and prior to the same thing was happening on both sides. So the fact that you have the convergence and that this would happen in 1982, right as the Soviet Union is being like self-destructed, all of a sudden you need to create a new narrative because the old Cold War narrative of capitalism versus communism isn't really gonna fit the new story. So what are you gonna do? Well, third way.
Yeah, and the world changed in the people don't realize these knock-on effects and how things happen. They basically intelligence took over government permanently in a way that we can't understand in 1992, that we can't fully comprehend. It had been struggling to take it over. I mean, George H.W. Bush had done a number on it anyway, and Bill Clinton was just handing over from another CIA guy. They were just slapping hands and saying, I'm out, you're in. And the 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 moment like 1992 happens, 1993, the beginning of 1993, all of the Labour people leave, go back to Britain,
Yep.
basically start to try and forge towards third way politics and to change the Labour Party over there. And over in America, at that moment, Epstein's coming in for one of his first of 17 visits in Bill Clinton's White House straight after for over the next 2 years, 17 visits in 2 years. And it's all around the same period. This is all about something that's even more, there's so much more happening here. There's a takeover of America by intelligence in a way that means that the person in power will always get away with what they want. And there's an agenda at play. And that agenda, I think is continued. I think it was said out loud when it was like, the fight against the axis of evil and the war on terror. And we're approaching the last part now, Iran. That's what they're pushing towards now. So I feel that there's, third way politics. For what you can't fill with policy that you're missing from the right or the left that you've purged.
Yeah.
What you have to do with third way politics is fill it with war and austerity. You don't get any other opportunity. Keep them poor. Keep the psychology of scarcity is easier to manipulate than that of abundance.
You're right. And that's going to play a role into the conversation where I want this to go when we start getting at the Epstein-funded Edge Foundation operation that you also outline like in a very powerful way. But before we do that, to just set the stage a little bit more contextually, you had brought up very, very briefly the figure of what's his name? Anthony Giddens, otherwise known as Tony Blair's guru, who was the inventor of this third way thing. Could you say a little bit about what is Anthony Giddens? How did he get influence? What is his thing? What is he that he should have such influence?
That is really interesting because when I was researching it, I went as far back as when he started writing these big political theses, and he'd written the third way was in a sense the third of his big political work. So I don't know what he had done before. I was too busy kind of moving my way forward from the 80s and the 90s. So I start off in the 80s here, and I move forward. And he is one of the most important and understated political minds of the modern era, of course, because most people don't know what third way is. Bill Clinton, you said, there's that article where Bill Clinton comes out. He has a whole speech about how the third way is the way forward. Helmut Kohl, is it? Or is it Gerhard Schroeder and
Schroeder.
Tony Blair? Yeah, are both making the new the third way as, speeches and etc. And this is because behind the scenes, Anthony Giddens has fed them with something, an ideology that can be utilized in government to keep power and make promises that will not be kept. They can, they give all of the what they intend to achieve, but not how they're going to do it. So they say their goal, but they don't say their route to it. And third way politics, the way it's designed, allows for that. He's a great mind in that sense, extremely close with Bill Clinton, obviously. Yeah. I think he also, and this links up now, he also runs in all of these circles because he's also teaching courses in Edge when it's almost fully funded by Jeffrey Epstein. So he's in the same circles as Bill Clinton, as Jeffrey Epstein, as all of these guys, but he influences Tony Blair and other people to an extent that it means it changes the world of politics, because every other country that sees, and this is really important to say, that Democrat Party that you're talking about changed. That Democrat Party that is there now is a central party that is nothing of what it used to be. The Labour Party now is a centrist party, nothing like it used to be. You used to care about the workers. There used to be unions. There used to be things that protected workers' rights. Those have all been left behind, dropped, axed over time. That's really what they've done here. The Democratic Party isn't a left-wing party. There is no left-wing party there anymore.
Well, you see, like the shadowy echo of it in like the weak, emaciated form, psycho-spiritually emaciated form of like Bernie Sanders as like the echo of this past thing that people are still emotionally resonating.
That's what Jeremy Corbyn was. That's what Jeremy Corbyn
Jeremy
was.
Corbyn actually had, I think, a little bit more teeth because when he had, like,
I
unlike
would love that if he had said enough about Palestine.
yeah,
And when he got into office, he went almost completely quiet and would not respond to criticism about that. And he needed to just be
he
like,
did
they
need to.
wanted to paint him as an anti-Semite, and when he needed to stand up, he didn't stand up, and
He
that was
buckled.
sad.
That's true. But whereas I think that this is my view is that uh Corbyn at least wanted political power, whereas I think Bernie Sanders psychologically
Mm.
is has immersed himself in an identity of being like the forever underdog yelling at the machine in the shadows. And
You
so
feel that at some point,
power came to him, he immediately flubbed it again and again and again when, like the entire revelation under WikiLeaks that Hillary had
mm,
consciously worked and conspired to destroy him. All of that was
mhm,
made public and he got on the podium and then he endorsed Hillary Clinton because
mhm.
he just couldn't imagine himself actually. It's like the typical like communist problem. It's like, what do we do when the proletariat get power? What do you do? Well, it's like, oh, like I
Yeah,
guess they
I wonder with Bernie Sanders whether it's like more he made a decision when he was younger, a
mm,
conscious decision that he was never going to be allowed to gain power.
mm-hmm,
If you run through the game, and that you play a different game for that reason, one where you never expect or want power at the end. And that really is a game that is just tricking the audience, most of all tricking yourself, because you
yeah.
can go through the motions, but when the proverbial shit hits the proverbial fan, you want someone who's actually going to do something. This
Yeah.
is what was the problem with Corbyn as well. He could have made he appointed Starmer as his right hand man. That was just intelligence coming in and sitting next to. I mean, we are currently led by an intelligence prime minister. This is not a normal state of affairs. We are, I
Yeah.
don't think people quite realize who Keir Starmer is. He's the
Yeah.
cover-up man, really.
Yeah, well, it's pure Fabian, and as you pointed out as well, Anthony Giddens was the director of the London School of Economics, very high level Fabian from
Mm.
1997 to 2003, and then he was made some sort of a baron for like good
Yeah, yeah,
works.
yeah.
Yeah,
Baron
like so
Giddens.
is what they do. Um, but you got this whole thing, and then this is sort of setting the stage. You got behaviorists, Rhodes scholars coming into America with Fabians, all in this weird devil's pack, taking control, redefining what it means to be so-called left. Um, Same things happening in the UK, which is involving also like bombing Yugoslavia, utilizing data to project power. It's not exactly your typical idea of what left historically meant, while austerity becomes another norm in the war against terror as well.
Destabilization through war. If you want to be able to enact perpetual warfare, and the left is always the one that tries to stop you enacting perpetual warfare, you need them out of power.
Mm.
And they wouldn't. They co-opted the party. They undermined the party, and they moved the party to the center. And there is no left in America. That's why the Democrats are currently the most horrible thing to look at, because it's all just fakery. It's all just a face. It's
Yeah.
not real.
Yeah, absolutely. So now you've got this whole thing, which then sees an emergence between this behaviorist economist monstrosity of all of these ideologues who believe you could program human beings like you'd program a machine with like whatever pleasure pain calculus or Benthamite, hedonistic calculus functions, determining how you can nudge people in one direction or another, being brought in with this whole turn towards a new kind of imperialism, a new kind of convergence of left and right into this weird middle ground that involves a surveillance state, that involves a more controlled society, with the illusion of personal freedom, with none of the reality of it. So you're like, yeah, we can give people the appearance of democracy on the local level, but none of the reality of being able to influence the system. That's going to be reserved for the top down governance. That's going to be hidden. So you got that whole thing, but this is all converging amongst Silicon Valley and a new billionaire class of cardboard cutouts that I think you paint a pretty good profile of what these are. And then you bring in both the figure of Jeffrey Epstein, you bring in the Edge Foundation, you're bringing in these Fabians the third way. So how do you tell that story a little bit more going into
Well,
the post 9/11 age?
okay. So what are you talking about with the third? Are we going on to the third culture? Because that is like
Yeah.
really central. I mean, there's no surprise Anthony Giddens is there teaching the third way within John Brockman's third culture. There is no way. There is no way that one thing becomes the other thing too. There is no way without something be like not. It has to be a synthetic creation. It had to be something that was manufactured. And John Brockman was a very interesting guy, brought up as a Jew in an Irish Catholic neighborhood in New York, always fighting. Him and his brother was like clever. They knew how to get to his brother worked on the early space program. So, I mean, his questions there, that's for sure. But John Brockman got involved in the elite thinking scene. He was hanging around with people like Andy Warhol and stuff. So he was with the trendy community, but also with the thinkers in New York. And he envisioned something which was very early on, really. He created something in the 80s called the Reality Club, which was getting together people like Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins and other thinkers of the time, and getting them together to have conversations. Steven Pinker was there, all of the same names that we know got involved in the Edge Foundation later on, because Reality Club really was the precursor to the Edge Foundation. And what he wanted to do with Reality Club and then Edge.org was he had seen what C.P. Snow had in a book called The Two Cultures in 1959, I think it came out. C.P. Snow said, hey, you've got these two parts. You've got science, formal science, the standard science, biology, maths, chemistries, physics. And then you've got these social sciences, and you've got music and things like that. And they just don't seem to communicate. You ask one of the ones on the other side what the second law of thermodynamics is, they won't know. You ask Shakespeare, they won't know. So there was obviously a divide. And John Brockman had said, okay, other people had fought up this idea, but John Brockman said, well, you need to create a third culture where those two sets of science can meet up and have conversations and understand each other. And that was what the Reality Club was. It was a way, I feel it was hiding behind that. It was a complex mix of intelligence and science leadership program, is what I think it really was when you look at it. Most of the people who were going through it were seen very early on as either being very wealthy from the work that they did, or extremely intelligent and well worth funding for whatever area of science they were. So they got only the best. These courses were small. These rooms weren't filled with loads of people.
Yeah, and like you said, not necessarily the best, but like the rock star personalities. They turned these scientific-y type of personality types into rock stars that were more than science, like Steven Pinker with the hair.
That's an element of third culture, yeah.
That's an element vibe, right? A Beatles mania or Trudeau mania type of like promotion of the aura of the brand of what these more than scientists were, more than
And it works as well, because then that takes its own life. You make someone famous, you give them an air, you give them the feeling of confidence that they've got that personality or they've got that persona, and they go out in the real world and get treated the same by the establishment, who are already wanting to get in with the cool kids anyway. Right. And these were the cool kids in New York, through the 80s and 90s, this Reality Club. And then in the 80s, he started Edge, and it started to move towards Edge, and then Reality Club got incorporated to that. By 1998, John Brockman had created this. It's a potential training ground for extremely intelligent people in their fields, people who have excelled. And some of by this time, Bill Gates is there, Jeff Bezos is there, Sergey Brin's there, Eric Schmidt's hanging around at the parties. These are the top guys, the top guys. And this goes forward. They run courses at Edge for these top guys. And when we ask, is there a room where all of the top CEOs in the world come and they collaborate together and they connive and they deceive us and they create their conspiracies, etc. These are the moments. These are the moments where they plan out our world. That's what Edge is. It's the moment where these people get together in a room and decide how we're going to live in the future without gaining our consent first. That's going to be part of it. The ability to gain. I say something. This is really important. I say something very early on in this article. If you want to change society completely, yeah, you've got to do four main things. You've got to have a technology that is paradigm shifting. And we've got that. There's loads of the computer world is something. I mean, cybernetics is what started John Bachman on his move, the book.
That's right. That's right. You make that
Science.
point that he got a copy of Norbert Wiener's Cybernetics from I forget which musician.
No, it's John Cage.
Oh, John Cage. John Cage. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So he got a copy of Cybernetics by Norbert Wiener, and that's a key formula. I've come to realize just how important the science of control that cybernetics is. How much of a master key that is to understand how these individuals who don't seem all that impressive unto themselves, when you see them in a little hotel, conference room talking all nerdy, like, they got some billionaire money going through. How are like such a small little cluster of nodes of influencers able to like manage a conspiracy of the Byzantine, Byzantine, Machiavellian sort that we're talking? Cybernetics is a very important. You can't understand the answer to that question if you don't look at cybernetics. So, what is it that Brockman got from cybernetics? What is it about cybernetics in your mind that gives them that power?
The question, the cybernetic question, that was what he said. It was something along those lines. That was his phrase. He wanted to go and take humans towards this transhumanist future, this new future that incorporated technology so much into our lives that we become technology ourselves. And this is what he wanted. This is what Epstein desired as well. If we look at all of the stuff that Epstein was doing, their want for the future was completely aligned. They wanted a world where the elites choose what we do and they'll do it the best. So, that's their opinion. They'll do it the best and they'll incorporate all the technology and they know where they're going. They want a world that can be run on algorithms while they decide what. It's just like the sense of want to control and power, of course. And they did this very well. I've had like moments. I failed to think of any offhand, but I've had a fair few moments where someone's handed me something and it started something special in my life. But it's very rare that someone gets handed something and it starts off a series of events that will completely change the world and see a small group of people enact complete control. So the things I was saying, right? Technology. You need a technology that can change a paradigm. You need a global leadership program to train the leadership group that will use your chosen political ideology. But then you need the consent of the people. You need to be able to make people agree to vote for whatever you've decided that they're going to have, whether they like it or not. But they're going to manipulate us, of course. That's what they're going to do, and that's also rolled up in this. So you've got the elements of leadership program here, but you've also got the political ideology being taught out here, and then you've got this very interesting event, which is Richard Thaler, and this is what I center the third culture on. Really, this is really the chorus of it. Richard Thaler is the father of behavioral economics. Behavioral economics is a way to think about behavior and economics so that you can psychologically manipulate the mass population without them knowing it's happening, and with very careful, what they call nudges. So it's called Nudge Theory. Came out in 2008. Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein produced this book, which was describing how, it was seen as very important to people like Cameron and Obama at the time. They were like, oh, we like this because it nudges people kindly and gently into doing stuff. And they say, oh, you can make someone stop eating sugar if you make them feel a little bit disgust for it or something like that. And there's a blunt end to that stick, but then there's a really sharp end to that stick. And that sharp end is the economics goes out the window. It doesn't matter about economics. It's just about behaviors part of it. Behavioral economics is two things. Economics is one part of it, but you take that away and it's just psychology. It's just how to manipulate the masses by making this happened during COVID. They used disgust. They used people's to create disgust of people who won't wear a mask or etc. to nudge their behavior.
Well, they got Cass Sunstein to be employed by the World Health Organ, the WHO, to create behavioral units to help people adapt themselves to the new constraints of COVID early on in 2020. And that
comes from the nudge units, because you've got it within no time. Cameron had set up the behavioral insight team and the nudge units after he'd got into power, and they continued throughout. They changed their formation and how they registered themselves, because first of all they were like one of the rarest sort of company. You never had a company that was kind of registered with the government and as a private organization. They always had to have either or, but they had all, and they had it seemed like what they saw was something very simple. If we start off by manipulating people with psychological operations and call it a nudge unit and behavioral insight team, it cushions the blow. And then you push more, you nudge faster, you nudge harder. And now we've entered a world where the consequence we saw of the very blunt end of the stick in about, say, 2010 to 2012, 2013 has changed to the sharp end of the stick now, where they are able to create platforms that can constantly nudge you by using an algorithm to constantly put things in front of your face. You're constantly on your Twitter feed, you're on your Facebook feed, you're on your YouTube feed, and they're feeding you what they think they should do to change. As they get better at this, they are able to change your entire direction, your entire perception of things without you even realizing it's happening. You will cease using logic. You will go down a road where you will be brainwashed. You will be part of right now we have some form of resilience, majority of us. But you look around and you see what happens during the time. You see what happened during COVID. As soon as it happened, like the majority of people, they flipped out. The Milgram experiment that was done, that would have an effect of 66% under controlled conditions. If you take away that controlled condition and put loads of nudging and behavioral, and everybody hates you and they disgust against you and the whole community is
99% easy.
Yeah, it changes. And that's what behavioral economics is. And this is where it's very interesting, because, of course, in 2007, Musk, Salah Kamanga, who was the head of YouTube at the time, Jeff Bezos, Daniel Kahneman, a few others. Nathan Myhrvold, I think, is there, of course. He's always there. Head of intellectual ventures. They own like over 7,000 patents or patent pendings on like some of the biggest stuff. He's been accused of being a patent thief, so he gets underneath finds a hole in the patent and then repatents it and steals the patent. That's what a fair few of the allegations have been against Myhrvold. But these guys were all in a room together for a 6-part course. Some of them only attended 3, some of them only attended 2, some of them were there for it all. George Dyson was there too, for a few. And these courses were run by Richard Thaler of the nudge unit, of the behavioral insight team. And this is a perfect example of what I'm saying. The moment where the biggest people who are going to be the head of Amazon, the head of YouTube, representatives of Google, Sean Parker, while he's involved.
Napster,
I
right?
think he was Napster. At this point, he's Facebook. He's invested in Facebook. I believe his face. I'm nearly 100% positive his Facebook. And he's invested in a couple of. He ended up being Teal's Founders Fund as well.
Well,
So, like very shortly afterwards, Spotify too. And then you got Elon Musk there, who's Tesla and SpaceX at that time, but he's already very early on clearly got his vision for X. He got this thing that he wants to create that is going to be the biggest social media platform around. He already had got X.com back. He had seen what the future looked like, or someone had given him what the future looked like, because a lot of these people would be learning, like Jeff Bezos himself. Jeff Bezos went through D.E. Shaw hedge fund, and D.E. Shaw was just game theorying out using computer algorithms to work out what the next big technologies on the World Wide Web would be,
yeah,
and putting people in
that's like
place.
the open story they even give, that they're game theorying out using algorithms like what the big, but at the same time, like these are people who are appear to me at least to be control position, like people who have been invited into certain clubs to be granted certain privileges to be the
Mhm.
front man or cardboard cutouts that would justify why a technology was being invested in the first place or brought online, that would not come from anything they were doing, but they needed to create a cover story. But D. Shaw, as you again pointed out, or David Shaw, was an economic policy advisor for Bill Clinton, and was at the time that Bill Clinton was bringing in Jeffrey Epstein under Mark Middleton, who also died a weird fucking death. 17 bloody times into the White House. But that's the time that Bezos is working as a hedge fund manager for
Vice president
well,
of
let's
DE
see right
Shaw.
there, right? Like,
Yeah,
so
I know. And
what's
then he leaves. He leaves. He buys a £300 or dollar station wagon off his family. They load it full of books, and he goes off to create Amazon. It's unbelievable story because
garbage?
it's just
I
not true. It's just
Yeah,
not true.
no.
D. Shaw owned 5 to 10% of the New York Stock Exchange when Jeff Bezos was about to create Amazon, and he went to D. Shaw and
Right.
said, "I'm creating Amazon," and D. Shaw said, "You have my permission," and that's it. And off he went. At the same time, the person that he had run programs with in this Jeff Bezos, the people he had run in the training programs in D. Shaw with Halsey Mine or Hasley Mine. I can never remember which way round it is. He went off to create download.com. These were already mapped out as being the bigger, they already see what technology they need to implement. So they need the leadership group. They get the leadership group in a room and they teach them. And in this occasion, with Musk and with Bezos and with others, these guys had already developed. They've already been given their golden chalice. They've already been given something big to run with. They get to this point. They're just in the middle of being trained in dark caves, well, rooms, but caves really, by some guy stroking a cat.
Right.
And in this case, that person at one point there's Anthony Giddens training people there, and another time it's there Richard Thaler, the father of behavioral economics, right at the moment that he releases Nudge as well. Like one of the first places he is at this Jeffrey Epstein funded. It's mostly funded at this point by Jeffrey Epstein. So I've got a picture where I found one of the pictures where if you didn't look through the other pictures, you wouldn't notice Elon Musk is in the background.
Yeah.
It is 2011, and people thought that's all I was talking about, but the evidence is clear. You can go to the Edge website, you go to the links within the article, and you can go to the minutes of the entire meeting, and where Musk and everybody else is being trained and exactly what they said. So it's not like oh, it's a conspiracy. He's just in a picture with him. There's detailed notes that they've kept themselves about what was said during that meeting in exact detail, and there's a video of the person who was presenting the
Yeah.
meeting as well talking.
So just to be clear, like you have Jeffrey Epstein funding these master classes under the Edge Foundation, overseen by what's his face cybernetics do John Brock.
John Brockman.
Yep. and behaviorist, godfather, human programmer, Richard Thaler. So you got this whole thing um, teaching this new generation of billionaire Silicon Valley things how to properly, I guess, play the game of nudging and managing the behavior of the people. So I guess the way I see it is like they're being also programmed to
Yeah,
be the higher managers of the mass zeitgeist,
yeah.
which would be sort of that's what I'm gathering, right?
Yeah, you go. Some of the courses are presented, of course, by Sandel Molnath, I can't remember which university he was at, but he's in the back of my head. But he's quite big on the behavioral economics. He finds it very interesting. Let's go to, I think it's course number 3, which is entitled "The Psychology of Scarcity." And an example of what this is they say, there's a psychology when people have less, they are easier to manipulate.
Yeah.
And Sendil Molnathan is saying, hey, when there's I know this is bad. We don't want this to happen. But there's a lot of psychology to go through here, and it's really interesting. We should really look at the psychology. And what they mean by that is how we use scarcity to make
Yeah.
people to manufacture the consent.
It's sick because this is something that's been observed clearly and used and manipulated for thousands of years, that when people are desperate, hungry, starving, afraid, their behavior is more predictable and they're more easy to turn into a herd or a mob and then, push in one direction or another, which involves when you're with a mob, you're not using your sovereign reasoning, conscience, aptitudes. You're basically giving that all up to some tribe hive think that can then be used to go and destroy a group that's been labeled in such a manner and sold to you as your enemy that you should hate and fear, or whatever. But it's all about, it's always been about getting the slaves to fight amongst each other. It's better to do that, and they're more predictable when they're in a state of scarcity and want.
Mhm.
And they're just doing the same thing that was done by ancient Babylonian high priests and
Yeah.
but they're just wrapping like some behaviorist pseudoscientific
These
veneer.
guys are doing everything. They're
Yeah.
creating the behavioral environment. They're creating the psychological environment. They're creating the teaching environment. They're creating everything they need to create this class that's separated above, that tells us worker ants what we're meant to do.
Yeah.
We have worker ants, soldier ants, and they all hail to these guys who sit in rooms and get trained. And this is a training we're seeing. And this is really bad. I mean, if this is a training that we're seeing on how to manipulate human psychology, and not only that, but the person who was attending this, one of the people who were attending this, one of the most, there's only about 10 people attending each one of these courses, and they're 10 of the biggest people around. And one of them is Elon Musk, who's gone on to purchase X and use it as exactly the tool that you would create to nudge people, to use behavioral insights to manipulate people's psychology. And then I look at it and I see that happening. We all see it happening. When I released this article, I released it 4 days before the election. I thought, that it's probably going to go around a fair bit, but it's going to get crushed. They're going to have to crush it. They can't let that go around. It's the elections. I know it was probably about 2 days and they started to limit it and it was obvious. And then it was they applied a label to my account, told me, we've applied a label to your account to limit your reach because we think you've done this and that and the other,
This is
whatever.
on Substack or what?
It's on X.
On X. Okay.
On X. So an article about how Elon Musk was
Right.
trained in behavioral
Well, that's not a
economics
surprise. Yeah. Okay.
and then once the time had passed, then they took the label off and said, sorry, we've checked your account and we decided you didn't do any of that anyway. And now one of the arguments I got to make here is it's really important. Elon Musk says we're not limiting freedom of speech, we're limiting freedom of reach. And that's a very nice little sentence. But think about this. If they lock you in a room without any windows and no way to communicate, and no way for people to hear you, it's completely soundproofed, and they tell you then that's freedom of speech, that is the most extreme lie. That is the furthest point away from the truth you can
Yeah.
go. We are going into a place where the guy who has been trained by the best and gone through the course has decided to sit through these courses to learn how to manipulate people is in power of the most potentially manipulative platform in the cyber realm. And this, the fact that the course was funded by Jeffrey Epstein is just insane. This should be everywhere. Everybody should know about this, and everybody should be questioning Elon Musk. But it's amazing how these things work. There's like a whole sphere of protection around people because about around people like this because the people who support them naively don't want to listen to anything. They can't hear anything. They're just like, they've turned off any criticism is just an attack. And what they say is an attack on the right, or they say on the other side it's an attack on the left. But I say the left and right don't exist anymore. And you're just being led into culture wars and other type of wars by this central blob that switches forces whenever it chooses. So it can just flip from side to side and the people can be Republican and Democrat, Democrat, Republican. And the actions that we will see in the next few years will be the actions that George W. Bush would have loved to have taken at the turn of this millennium.
Yeah, absolutely. And you definitely see that convergence with uh Liz Cheney and that whole neocon
It's
blob
insane.
converging with Hillary Clinton, endorsing Kamala. And you got this weird convergence of the worst of both sides, very clearly coming forth as what some call the uniparty. And I've always said, like, it's not about what's left versus right. It's about right versus wrong. And that's really the standard is it right or wrong? It's not like, and they're at the reading through history, you look at some of the policies of the people who got assassinated, who are like taking a stand and really acting according to their conscience and reasoning powers. And I'm here referring to people like Martin Luther King Jr. or John F. Kennedy. And you look at what they were saying, what they were doing, how they self-identified, how they cultivated and their persona, and they weren't falling into the customary labels of like, are they left or are they right? Are they socialist? Are they capitalist? They weren't falling into any of those labels that we're being told we have to identify everything around. They were doing things that involved their conscience, a sense of natural law, a sense of being willing to die for the sake of the health of their soul. And they did. They walked the walk and they went the distance. And that was like a healthy like I remember there was a speech by Martin Luther King Jr. where he's like talking about the problem of Marxism that loses the individual in favor of the collective, and the problem of radical capitalism that's all about the individual at the loss of the general welfare of the whole. And he's like, no, we need a higher synthesis. Now one could say, okay, well, maybe he's a third way social engineer. No, he's just finding a healthy way of resolving a false dualism. And all of these guys are, like you said, they're not creating something above the dualism. It's literally within the dualism. They just found a way to take
Yeah.
the worst of both aspects of these
And
polarities.
they make you believe that it's like this
Yeah.
ascendant middle instead.
No, it's on the same plane. It's not ascended. It's on the same plane, exactly that. To give people maximum perception of freedom with none of the reality, like a la Brave New World, right? It's Aldous Huxley.
I think there's something I think there's something that's really emblematic about one of the companies I mentioned just at the end. I mentioned Ehud Barak had originally set up with Nicole Youngkerman, with Jeffrey Epstein, and with funding also from Peter Thiel. Those four are the reason why Carbine 9/11 existed, which is this cyber company. And something that's really interesting that I find interesting, all those people already are pretty interesting that they, Ehud Barak fronts a company that's funded by Peter Thiel, Jeffrey Epstein, and Nicole Young. That's already interesting.
Mm.
They stock all of the first members of the board of Carbine 9/11, all Israeli intelligence assets.
What is
And
Carbine 9/11? What do they do?
Carbine 9/11 is a solution. It's like a 911 solution. So instead of calling 911, when you call 911, it goes through to an operator, and that operator then takes down the details. That operator works for Israeli intelligence.
Okay.
And they're going to relay the information to the drone or whatever that's going to come and check out what's going on. It's
Okay.
a new form of policing.
Okay.
Just before I go on, you're going to have to make a pause here because I've got to plug in my laptop.
Do it.
Okay.
Oh, wait. All right.
So what's really interesting is you've got this company, Carbine 9/11, and in it are these different elements. They have this board, and it's all stocked by Israelis. Pinchas Bucras is in there. He was one of the chief commanders of either the IDF or the Mossad, but one of the top guys. Ehud Barak's fronting it up. Amir Elakai and others who worked in the office for the prime minister in Israel, and this Epstein connected Nicole Youngkerman, who's got loads of operations going on, and she's an extremely interesting character. And you got them all forming a business, which is, of course, about like getting data, sifting as much data as possible. And it's funded by the people who that when I wrote the first article on Carbine 9/11, they all had a panic. They removed their board of directors completely straight away, and they replaced it with people like Michael Chertoff. So they replaced them with neocons. And I think they're starting to show their face completely. If we don't get what we want, we'll stick a neocon in charge and we'll get away with whatever we want. And the people behind this, the people who are funding this, are the Peter Thiels, the Jeffrey Epsteins, and Nicole Youngkerman. Nicole Youngkerman has gone on to she had something that was like a satellite array that she sold to Starlink, and now she's part of SpaceX. So they're all involved in the same blob. It's a global intelligence blob. It's not, as soon as the Israelis have been rumbled, they get replaced with Americans looking neocons who are all going to be smiling and be like, you can't do anything about us. We'll get away with whatever. And so what I find interesting about that is that there's the levels of excuses of removing accountability and responsibility to people who are just can't be held responsible or can't be held accountable for lots of different reasons. And neocons, especially because they run so many different operations that are focused in places like Ukraine. I mean, the Alliance for Secure Democracy runs out of the German Marshall Fund, and the German Marshall Fund is heavily focused on the East-West dynamic, and they were all very involved in the creations of NGOs that would target the East and stability in Eastern countries, and allow them to then replace. I mean, in 2004, Ukraine had 30,000 NGOs. It used to take 100 to 150 NGOs to start cooing countries back in the late 90s. But by the time late 80s, even 1989 onwards, you've seen a lot of NGOs come into Europe. By the time it got to 2004, honestly, Ukraine is completely riddled. These are the same people who are creating all the crises all over the place. This is all manufactured. These are all people who
Yeah.
sit in the same room together.
And I think that that's the key about cybernetics as a doctrine or a technology, as they call it. And like, sure, on a practical level, I'm sure that for managerial purposes, cybernetics like reflects something useful for a division of labor and getting specialists from one domain to go and focus on a job. It's very complex and multifaceted. Sure, okay, fine. But you see the usefulness for maintaining this type of control of an empire is that without people realizing that there is a common central command, is that you create thousands of NGOs. Each one appears to have a different, this one's a human rights thing, this is a LGBTQ thing, this one's a train the lawyers thing, and whatever. They all seem to have a slightly different mandate, a slightly different. Oftentimes, there's overlapping boards of directors on a bunch of them, and funding sources as well. But then you none of them, they all think that they're autonomous. The majority of people who work for each one believe that they're autonomous. They're
Amen.
highly adapted and specialized to their own particular niche, and they can't see what the department next door is doing. Like the Manhattan Project, most scientists had no idea what the next grouping of scientists working on another aspect of the atom bomb were doing, and only a small executive nerve center has the authorization to see what the whole is doing and then like push it in one direction or another. So people start behaving like machines that are not autonomous. And so then it kind of like creates this Pygmalion effect where human beings trained to be like machines then can't refute the fact that machines are going to replace humans because machines can calculate better. And so get used to getting extinct, slave, unless you fuse with machines, which is exactly what Peter Thiel and Elon Musk are providing as our great solution to avoiding going extinct in this Darwinian weird eschatology. Is like,
I think that's what the real result of the third culture would be, though. That's the real result of what John Brockman wanted to create, is this a gap in between where they were like, well, in the technology of the future, we will be able to synthesize these two things together, these two different cultures. We will have technologies to do that are beyond our rational reasoning now or understanding now, but will eventually be just all around us. So they're relying on technology advancing that part, so they have a quick jump to the next bit. That we're already ahead because we can now merge these, and we've already done all of our groundwork to put the people in to power and to have power look the way we want. That's another thing. Like, one of the things I've really enjoyed doing in my research is looking for those moments where they're all sitting in a room together. So Darren Kenton, who helped me with the Third Way article, one of the things that he brought to me very early on was the 2011, I think it is, slides for the World Economic Forum's training program. And the World Economic Forum, you have like 8, 9 main slides, and they tell you exactly how our world is planned. You've got slides for mega city, sustainable growth, all of it, Even the manipulation part is there on one of the slides. Manipulation, you can make people do whatever you want to, is written on the World Economic from their own Flickr account. Their own training slides. They have population control, and they cross it out and put management, because to them that's funny. Because to them they're taking the Mickey out of us, as we'd say in the UK.
Yeah. This actually, have you had a chance to read Peter Thiel's Straussian Moment essay from 2007? It's
No.
good. It's good. It's
Okay.
really
I
useful.
bet.
And I've reread it twice now, and I'm incorporating that into my book because I find that, like, he's a guy who was early on. He was given patronage by high level Straussians in the 80s when he was still a student at Stanford, making a Stanford like libertarian journal, and it was Irving Kristol who was backing him up then, a major like former Trotskyist who became one of the controllers of the neocon Straussian new thing that infused itself, ironically, kind of like the same way that these guys took the Democratic and liberal and the Labor parties and turned them into these monstrosities. The same thing happened to the Republicans, which lost their McKinley, Abraham Lincoln heritage and became these Straussian neocon former
They have to
Trotskyists.
compete. They have to
Yeah,
be driven into that
yeah.
competition.
Of and these are people who all believe ultimately the same thing, that there's, that democracy is a nice and useful thing for creating sacred or governing myths for stupid plebes, but that the higher managers must use the noble lie. They take a very literalist reading of Plato's Republic, and then they see themselves as the guardians to manage the shadows on the wall of the cave that we all have to be like locked into with, stories of terrorism and 9/11, whatever else. But Peter Thiel in his thing on the Straussian moment, that he's saying, he's very clear, he's a Straussian, and And he's saying like now it came about, the Straussian moment was 9/11, and sure enough, it was like, it really was. That was like, Strauss was a friend of Carl Schmitt, the Nazi crown jurist that created the legal justification of the executive authoritarian policy of crisis management after the Reichstag fire, which was exactly what 9/11 was. Ruled by emergency decree, by a master class. And in it, he's talking about X, and he's actually giving what I found to be, because I've always been wondering, why is it this theme of X pops up with, like, whether it's Thomas Huxley's X Club that was like managing Charles Darwin, and the whole like reorganization of science around a very peculiar interpretation, right? Every branch of science was reorganized under the X Club of Thomas Huxley. And why is it X? They even have like, even these Esalen biographers like Jeffrey Kripal, who's like the official biographer of Esalen in his book on Esalen, makes such a big emphasis on like how interesting that Esalen emerged the same month that X-Men was created by Stanley and Jack Kirby. I'm like, why are they putting such an emphasis on this? And like why X? Why such a big thing with Elon? And Peter Thiel talks about how John Locke, who you could say is largely the real founding father of modern behaviorism, who promoted the idea of a blank slate, that everybody is born as a blank slate, and thus all ideas of morality, of value, it's really just the definitions of the powerful that can be written upon the blank slates, the programs of the human computers, to be like then adapted to whatever system of governance. And John Locke was a director for the British Royal Africa Company, like creating the slave trade. So that's not I don't think that's detached from his philosophy. But this is what Thiel is saying. John Locke, he's saying that John Locke not only promoted the idea, and I didn't even know this, of a secret teaching of Jesus for his favorite elect, and then a mass teaching that people could read when they buy a Bible for the stupid people, which indicates that Locke was actually a Gnostic, mystery cultists, promoted this idea of the secret teaching. The Kabbalists have their own thing with like the secret teachings of Moses that he gave to his favorite orally, and then he wrote down things for the stupid people. That's what the Straussians do as well with Plato. They're like, yeah, Plato talked about justice, but he actually was giving his secret teachings that the real Plato was Thrasymachos, was Gorgias, was the opposite of everything that the stupid people think he was. And that's how they all create this idea of a esoteric thing. Now, the final thing is on X. Thiel says that Locke described the agreed upon forbidden domain of discussion permitted for the proletariat, or for the masses, around what human nature is and truth, capital T. And he said that John Locke called all of that X as a symbol for the prohibited domain of debate or discussion around fundamental first principles. And he gave that symbol itself. And he goes on in his Straussian moment for several paragraphs describing Locke's relationship to the symbol of X, meaning that whole thing, which I found to be like the most satisfying explanation I've seen so far to account for what this is. Because what these behaviorists are doing, what Elon Musk's thing is ultimately all about, is who controls the levers of what defines human nature, the image of man that we are allowed to have as an identity that we adapt into, that defines and predicts all of our behavior for who's controlling us, right? So anyway,
it's a hidden factor, it's the unknown fact, but also I think that's I try and like I've been thinking about this for probably decades. I've been thinking about this one thing, is that why don't most people notice? I know there's a lot of behavioral stuff going on. There's a lot of psychology. There's a lot of things stopping us noticing things. And, like someone will say about, say, one of my articles, I've looked around the internet and I found something. They're like, oh, good, well done searching. And it's like, but you've got to know what to search for. And how do people not notice what they need to look at? And I realized that the one thing that the elites really can do really well, what their main game is realizing what's important that we won't understand is important. until it's too late and they're in complete control of it. And so they're always looking for that. They're looking for the something else, the missing factor, the thing that's taken away. And within their small groups, they're going to have conversations that are closer to getting to that understanding of what either the fact that's hidden, the factor that's hidden from them, or the factor that is hidden within the societies that they lurk within, that they get given access to at the right times. And some of it probably will be sensible. Some of it will be a little thing that will change your complete understanding of an entire dynamic of a situation, that will allow you an advantage over people. That Herman Kahn, in a policy document in 1968, I think it is, there's a section called ancillary document about training leadership groups. And, that's one of the things that they say. We got to create these organizations outside that train our leaders differently. They've always done that. They've always done that. They've told us they've done that cryptically, I believe, but they've always done that. But Herman Cahn's talking about it on a basic leadership of nation state level. But behind the scenes, there's loads of leadership programs for things that we don't understand. That's probably what the Masonic Lodge is and what all of these other they're just training programs for an extreme elite to know part of something that is missing knowledge to most of the rest of us. So yeah, that's just
No, I think that's a brilliant point, because I think that I was reading okay, so I did a series of books some years back when I was trying to make sense of what is this thing called Canada that I was born into. And I was sort of a political activist, and I was having trouble figuring out what is it that I'm supposed to do. I was working with the LaRouche organization at the time, and we had certain, general goals. So going to the Senate, going to Parliament, trying to have meetings, organizing the population with tables, and trying to get people to take on a bigger idea of what the crises are facing humanity. So it was like big ideas. It was very, very good, but at the same time, the LaRouche organization was an American organization, and we were just sort of like a very small group of maybe like 8 people, like a very tiny thing here in Quebec, in Canada, trying to adapt in a literal way, like these American policies for a Canadian context. Like, we got to impeach Dick Cheney. And it's like, well, that's not going to work. Like, Canadians are like, well, what am I going to do? Yeah, it sounds nice, but I'm Canadian. So I was like, okay, well, let's figure out what the hell is this thing called Canada that nobody seems to have bothered doing the work mapping it out. And so part of that research involved doing a lot of history work. And I found myself looking at the cybernetics and Rhodes scholars that had been shaping the entirety, just like the world. Like, you can't account for anything bad that happened in the United States or in Europe if you don't look at the Fabians and Rhodes scholars. The same thing for Canada. And I found one key figure who was the Privy Councillor, the president of the Privy Council of Canada in the 60s, very closely aligned with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who was a Fabian, who brought in the cybernetics program of Alexander Keane to Canada. And this guy was named Maurice Lamontagne. And Lamontagne, he drafted a massive Royal Commission report for the Senate from 69 all the way to 73 that completely changed how we funded science, how we defined science and education and R&D. And it was basically the Lamontagne Commission report on science. That's the very boring name. Now, this guy is a very powerful guy, very closely aligned with Maurice Strong. He was a friend of Maurice Strong, super tight with this whole thing. And in it, he said that human society aspires for discoveries of truth as part of what appears to be human nature. And every time we try to make a discovery of something truthful, we make new technologies that breaks people out of their limits to allow more people at the expense of nature. So every time we have people allowed to pursue discoveries, they destroy nature by building new technologies, new hydroelectric dams or whatever that disrupts the supposed mathematical equilibria in nature. And so he actually explicitly said, I was reading this bloody report, that he said, well, the big problem is, how do we stop man's creativeness is the obvious question. He says it. And then he does like a little bit of a safeguard. He's like, well, obviously we can't stop man's pursuit of the transcendental, but what we can do is redefine his values so that the idea of discovery becomes associated with activities which reduce the impact of human society upon nature. which
Mhm.
in other words is a semantic way of saying reduces the ability of human beings to sustain themselves, or AKA kill themselves in defense of some imagined equilibrium. So they're acknowledging that there is something transcendental about the idea of going into the unknown, of making discoveries, but they're like, no, we have to co-opt it and rebrand
Mhm.
it so that the
Mhm.
effects of that thing that we all yearn for, because we all have a soul that yearns for the immortal, the eternal, these transcendentals. We all have that, but they want to rebrand it so that it's channeled into something which is more controlled and not
Mhm.
disruptive to the overarching
They're like obsessive bean counters. They've
obsessive
got,
bean counters.
yeah, well, desperate to some people can accept a shoddy office with everything going wrong, and some
Yeah.
people just can't. I've worked in the emergent service market. I've worked in hotels, for years in hotels, and you had some people who could handle the everything going chaotic, and some people were just the best under order, but needed it to survive. If things weren't in order, they would become chaos. And I think those people are the type of people who end up getting into power. They have so much experience of things not being in order, that they go into chaos, that they end up, the only way they can sustain stay away from that chaos is by making everything orderly. And those are the people who rise up, the narcissistic ones, the Machiavellians, who are able to really just want to analyze every part of everything and find an answer that's mathematical at the end of it. And in a sense, that goes back to the inability of the two cultures to actually coordinate and understand what they're doing, and a thirst to bridge that divide. That's something we're doing constantly. This is what both the third way and the third culture represent, is that want to control the synthesis of almost uncontrollable events to an extent that they have to remain hidden, and there has to be a controlling group who has overall power, and most of the other part of the population can't know. That's the cycle we're in. It keeps going around in a circle, and we're there again. And they know that either side, the right or the left, is about people being in control. When the right is, like during this election, the right was mobilized, infused with this idea that they were going to be able to have influence on what is eventually going to be just an almost centrist, warmongering, austerity government, whether they like it or not, because we're stuck in that realm, and that's the paradigm we're stuck in for the time being, until someone actually tells the truth, until we can actually, have proper accountability and responsibility. That's where we're going to be. I think that's part of it as well. The run away from these powerful people are trying to run away from accountability and responsibility, and that leads them to become these sort of centrists that can change the color of their skin and their spots as soon as they need to. They need to have that quick movement to navigate it. It's people trying to control the synthesis is what we're watching all of the time in loads of different ways. This isn't going to ever change.
Yeah.
This swings. Right has power, left has power. Right has power, left has power. Eventually, you end up in the center for a bit, and then it starts oscillating again.
Yeah.
And that is going to be until we learn how to accept that in and a system in a way that can accept that. I don't think we'll ever come out with anything but war and austerity.
Yeah, well said, man. No, I agree completely. And I think that a lot of this comes down to, again, just the fact that there are always these dipoles that appear to be opposite aspects of the human condition. And I think you could boil them down as CP Snow does, and that's actually a really interesting essay that everybody should read. It's a short little thing. They can get it online. The two cultures that you've got the emotional aspect of the human condition, the feeling part that is usually attributed to the cause of passion, the driving force of creativity, the arts. There's an element of deep truth to that. And then the logical part of the mind that tries to find simplicity behind the apparent complexity of the night sky and looks for order and patterns and unity. But that isn't really so much emotional in its character,
Mm.
but they both exist in the
Mm.
human condition. They're both two sides of the same thing. So you could either start building institutions that completely embody one extreme aspect or the other, and then play them, whether left versus right in the French Revolution, getting the Jacobins to be the emotional plebe, representatives calling for the beheading of the aristocracy, or inversely the Girondin right reactionaries calling for the restoration of order, killing a bunch of Jacobins as well. So you could do that, or you could be the human, and the human is the way I'm thinking about it is are the examples of people who were able to harmonize those two aspects of their being to be um, sublime, noble humans who utilized reason tempered by conscience and who used their feelings educated by their reason and were able to make beautiful breakthroughs in music and listening to Beethoven's night symphonies or Mozart's Requiem, or
Mm.
it's incommensurably transcendentally emotionally moving, but it's also satisfying to the reason as well. If you think about it actively while you're also experiencing it, it's another level. So it makes sense when you have a Max Planck or an Einstein playing the violin and playing Mozart while they're trying to solve problems scientifically that are prohibiting them from discovering some law of the universe. If it's a creative universe, not a cold, static universe that doesn't care about us, but if it's actually a universe embedded with purposefulness and beauty, then it would make sense that they would make their discoveries by going to Mozart and Beethoven and then returning back to their mathematical formulas that are blocking them, that allow them that experience of the eurekas, and that result in human beings being able to make new discoveries into the atom, new insights into cosmos that allow us to have more people, transcend limits to growth, which the oligarchy hates because they were so good at being hyper adaptive to the previous system of controls, of knowledge, of resources that allowed them to play us against each other in scarcity, that the
Mhm.
oligarchy then has to go and like do all of this extra work to undo, sabotage the new ideas. And it's like so much effort. And all they want is just to be fucking lazy. At the end of the day, the oligarchy they're born into their privilege. At the end of they just want their stasis and obedience. That's all they want. It's
I think a lot of the richest, a lot of the oligarchy, a lot of the people who make it up to top, the families who have stayed there at the top, they have to have a trait that passes down.
mm,
And the other side that never succeeds also has to have a trait that's passed down. And those two traits have to be opposing to each other. And those two traits are most likely to be the dance between the empath and the narcissist. And the middle ground is where some sort of logical solution to all of the ills resides. Again, the third way of the crossover in the Venn diagram of the narcissist and the empath is probably the truth. But the fact is where it is amongst there, you can never know. And I think that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the cold, hard, logical mind does not care, it's not emotional. That is representative of a narcissist. And on the other side, or one of the dark triad sort of personalities. And then over on the other side, the empath, if you're right on the far side, they care so much for human life, but they can't impact policy to change that, because the crossover, the more likely our society is built by the people who are more likely to be able to control, not the ones who feel emotion. And that is one of the main problems we got. And again, is like all of these binary problems where there's crossover, we always end up in the same place. We're looking for a solution
yeah.
every single like civilization, and we all think we're different as well. We all think this is a new thing, apart from a couple of people right at the top, a few people right at the top who know exactly. I say couple, many people, many families who have passed down information throughout time, just like we were talking about, that's kind of hidden from the rest of us, or that we don't have the logical mind to kind of understand properly, and allows them to just remain in power and remain in control.
Absolutely. And it's dirty, right? Because they have this cosmology of their right to be in control because we're too stupid to govern ourselves or make our own choices wisely because, we're not born into the higher bloodlines or whatever. But then they play all this huge dishonest game by like cutting off people's kneecaps, or breaking people's kneecaps and then telling them so to run the race and then convincing them that, hey, look, you weren't meant to run the race. Well, it's yeah, but you went out of your way to stupidify their education system, to make their culture dumb, to bring out the worst in them. And then when they were when the effect of that was you got a bunch of like foolish slobs thinking that stupidity is normal, then you could say, well, look, human beings were never fit to self-rule. We need this like master class to manage the shadows. And it's like, what a dirty, dirty fake game. What a way to rig the system, you know?
Yeah.
And they're
I
lying to
get it.
themselves at the end of the day. But
They
dude,
love it.
this was cool, man. I really appreciate this chat. This was good. And I think a lot of people watching this are going to be edified, as well as maybe horrified, which is healthy. You should be
Mhm.
horrified. If you're not horrified, there's something wrong with you. So yeah, I appreciate this. Your two articles are going to be in the description box under this video. I highly encourage people. This video is a great gateway. I don't want to say it this, but I'll say it. The great gateway drug into like higher deep research. But don't think this is a substitute. You don't have knowledge until you really dig into it. So really take the time. Don't use an AI chat GPT to get the summary of Johnny Vedmore's complex articles.
Agreed. Oh my God, that really got me. That how many people a load of people did that with the Eric Weinstein article.
Yeah.
They did not get the point of it. You miss out a load. There's also I try and say within like the third culture, it's like roughly 20 hours of bonus material attached to it. That's videos that go through all of the newspaper archives about different subjects. There's loads of different things and read throughs. So people, please get involved. Click all the links. Have a look, proper look.
Yeah, that's it, right? And I was saying that at the beginning, that like I'm a link clicker. It's because you don't take. It's like Geordie LaForge said, or no, his name was LeVar Burton in this show called Reading Rainbow. And don't take my word for it. Read the book, and reading the article is really important. And then ideally going the next step of clicking on the links to really own the discovery for yourself. Because if you just get the Cliff's Notes or the general gist of it, you're not really equipped to battle. It's not your tool that you can own in battle as a weapon that you need to have in the information war that we're all in, whether you like it or not. So to really own it and to play with it means you got to click on the links, read the secondary sources that Johnny's done the thousands of hours of research to conglomerate to pull together and provide for you, which he did. So check out that stuff. Go to the links. Johnny, thank you so much. Again, I appreciate this. I look forward to your future research and our future conversations. This was really good. Take care, man.
Awesome.